Welcome. I am very excited to be with you this evening. We had to reschedule this from earlier this summer, and I'm so glad we were able to get it back on the calendar because as I was telling Jessica Rhoades, who is one of our special guests tonight, I'm up to episode 7 and I've just been loving this show so much. I got another person watching it today and it was frankly blowing her mind. So I'm very excited for this conversation tonight. For those of you who don't know, I'm Ebony Adams. I'm the manager of public programs for Women in Film. And joining me tonight for this edition of Women in Film's Laptop Cinema Club are Alexandra Cunningham and executive producer Jessica Rhoades. They're gonna be talking about Dirty John, the Betty Broderick story, which is based on the true story of love gone wrong, spanning the 60s to the 80s through the breakdown of a marriage that Oprah deemed one of America's messiest divorces, before it ended in a double homicide. And now, to tell you a little bit about our guest tonight, Alexandra Cunningham is the creator, showrunner, and executive producer of Dirty John, which is based on the hit LA Times podcast of the same name, which aired its first season on Bravo. Season 2, Dirty John, the Betty Broderick Story, premiered on USA Network this June and stars Amanda Peet and Christian Slater. Cunningham began her television writing career on NYPD Blue. She's also written and produced such shows as Rome, Desperate Housewives, the American remake of Prime Suspect, Bates Hotel, Aquarius, and most recently Chance, starring Hugh Laurie on Hulu. Jessica Rhoades is executive producer on season 2 of Dirty John, on Gillian Finn's Amazon Studios straight-to-series project Utopia, and the HBO Max limited series Station 11. She executive produced the critically acclaimed Sharp Objects for HBO, based on the novel by Gillian Flynn and adapted by Marty Noxon, as well as the 4th and 5th seasons of Showtime's The Affair. Previously, she was head of television at Blumhouse Productions, and prior to that, she was an independent producer for 15 years, producing scripted and unscripted series for Bravo, E!, Nickelodeon, and TLC, and partnered with actress Ashley Tisdale at Tisdale's Blondie Girl Productions for series and movies for Disney Channel and Freeform. So tonight, we're gonna let Alexandra and Jessica talk for a bit about the show, its development and creation, the challenges and excitement of telling stories like this one. And then I'm gonna pop my camera back on and I will start throwing your questions at them. So make sure that throughout their conversation, if you've got a question about the show, about their careers, about what they look for when they staff a writer's room, this is the place to ask those questions. So make sure that you don't lose this opportunity. So I'm gonna throw it to you. Thank you both so much. I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Ebony.
Thank you.
Get started.
Good start. I just realized we match.
I know, I noticed that. Is that blue or black?
It's black. Are you blue?
This is blue.
Oh.
And we cannot do what Amanda Peet and Sarah Paulson just did on Instagram Live on the InStyle magazine site, which we highly recommend that you visit after this.
Must see. There's the Dirty John, Betty Broderick Story finale, and then Instagram, InStyle, Amanda Peet, Sarah Paulson.
Sorry, just if you want, if you really want to watch some inspired insanity. They've been best friends for 20 years, and Sarah, is essentially supposed to be talking to Amanda about the finale tonight, but a lot of things get talked about.
It's anyway, a good time. It's just a good time.
Let's talk about the show.
I actually do feel, though, it's like between getting to see you on Zoom so many times and on the phone today, this feels like the closest we've been to getting to be like back in the room, like back in the edit room, actually getting to see each other every day. Mm-hmm. And I love it. Miss it. So jumping in, obviously coming off last season, and I know a little bit about this obviously because we got to sit down and I got to look at you and say, oh my God, I love season 1 so much. What are you planning for season 2? And when you told me, I had a full body chill. But what made you, after all the rave reviews of season 1, telling that story, what made you choose Betty Broderick for season 2?
Right. Well, we knew we had 2 seasons up front. So we knew, even as we were planning the first season that there was going to be another one. And so it was sort of incumbent on me to have a plan, which is always challenging. And there had been a story, if you think about the first season as we've talked about this, love gone wrong, combined with the idea of coercive control, because obviously there's a lot of loves that go wrong there's a lot of relationships that are toxic and badly, but there isn't always necessarily an element of coercive control present, thank God. But it's definitely there more often than you expect. And I think people are starting to realize that it's happening to them more than they knew. But so in order to maintain a franchise, you want there to be a through line, right? And so Love Gone Wrong is a through line and coercive control is a through line, kind of narrowed it down to those kind of stories. And when I was going to present the story to the studio, you always want to go to them with more than one idea because they may not like the idea you like. But you also, which is sort of a parenting decision I always think of, like you offer choices and you like all the choices. Are you going to eat your meat first or your vegetables first? And then they say my meat and then they're eating something, right? But you know,
you might be a better parent than I am.
What?
You might be succeeding as a parent better than I am.
I mean, you know, but if you say, are you going to eat your vegetables? And they say no, then you immediately have to go to, if you don't do this, you know, anyway. So I brought them 3 stories that I would be willing to tell for the second season to find out which one they liked better. And Betty Broderick was one of them because I have been fascinated with Betty Broderick on one level or another since I thought I was going to be a doctor, which clearly worked out really well. Like I just encountered it as anybody encounters a salacious story, just, you know, in the 80s version of that, it was at the library, microfiche at the library. It definitely wasn't TMZ or Google or anything. And I just, at that time, was a teenager and just thought it was a great, crazy story that I liked sort of imagining my friends' moms going insane in that way. And that was just entertaining to me because I was young and shallow and callous and didn't care. And then over the years, I kept revisiting this one book that we got the rights to for the show, even though the show's not based on it. This book, Until the 12th and Never by Bella Stumbo, who also was an LA Times journalist, and the LA Times are our corporate executive producer partners on this because of the Dirty John podcast first season being originally published and produced by the LA Times. And so, you know, it sort of made a lot of sense that Bella Stumbo found her way into this LA Times produced show. But I would reread that book over the years because for me, it was like in cold blood. You know, it's one of those like classics of, you know, the written form that you just really are affected by. And at some point I realized that I actually now had almost everything in common with Betty Broderick. That I was an upper middle class wife and mother who drove an SUV and, you know, was, if I got divorced, if I found out my husband was cheating, like that so much of my life is tied up and my identity is tied up in this world that I've created, entangled finances, you know, friend groups, all, you know, because you're married. And so I suddenly realized it had become not a story that I thought was salacious anymore, but actually a there but for the grace of God go I kind of story. And so I thought it was going to fit perfectly with the first season, but you know, I obviously had to let the studio tell me that was true, and they did. Yeah, and then we found Amanda, and then everything else was icing, essentially.
I mean, it's funny because one of the things that we've, you know, that when you talk about transitioning from seeing it one way at an earlier age to seeing it at another age, I feel like that's also the way the story was told. You know, I think in its original time and kind of in a salacious way, the hot take was that crazy lady, you know, that crazy, but you know, and I think that one of the coolest parts about collaborating with this amazing team and telling the story at this exact moment was this idea of how do we give it more context than that? How do we tell the actual story of how this happened? And I think one of the fun parts of that was also flipping to the female gaze, you know, kind of telling it from a female perspective, which included all these female directors, including yourself. So I mean, I think I don't know about you, but like for me over the years, you know, you're always having those conversations about the right director for a project or the right directors for episodes. And this like, sometimes having an outside point of view, like with Sharp Objects, Jean-Marc sometimes wouldn't understand something about like what Camille would do, and Amy and Gillian and Marty and I would all be like, but we do that. That's like okay. But you'd explain it, and it actually kind of like opened up the conversation. I found, I don't know about you, like here it was a lot of like knowing looks, and like the moment you'd say like, and then she feels like this, all the women would be like, yep, that's next. That's what comes next. Was that different for you having 5, well, it's not 5 to you, but 4 other women directing?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's like a thing you don't notice until after it's over. Like, the Edith Wharton concept of like, I'm going to figure it out a long time afterward. That it was only afterwards that it was like, oh, I didn't have to have a lot of those conversations about like, I don't understand what's going on in this scene, like with a director. Like, or, whether it's they're coming to you and say in the morning and saying, that scene we have to shoot later, I don't really understand why she did that, or why he would react that way or whatever, which the difference between us and Sharp Objects is that with us, that's what really happened. So it's for us, that's always important to me to figure out why people did the thing they actually did, as opposed to, I wouldn't have done that, so I'm going to change it to a thing that makes sense to me, which that's not what Sharp Objects did. It's just like that sprang out of Gillian's head. So, Gillian has the authority in that sense to be like, because I created it is why, with me, it's more like, yeah, I don't know why that person did that incredibly inflammatory and arguably stupid thing, but they did. So I need to try to figure out what the reasoning is behind it. But I never had to do that with almost anyone. Except Amanda, who would always just be like, why do you think I'm doing this? Why do you think she did this? And it was more for process rather than to challenge me on it, It was more like, I need to find a way into it rather than, I don't like it, can you change it?
Right. So. Well, I think that was, can we just talk about Amanda?
We could make this whole thing about Amanda.
We could make more than 30 minutes about,
film, not women.
The most incredible thing is I think one of the things that you did so beautifully in the season, and then Amanda, just kind of embodied it, was I feel like I've been watching people, he was talking about being up to episode 7, I think we've all been watching people the last couple of weeks binging to catch up for tonight's finale. And I think there's a definite point where you're like, I get it. I get why she did that. I would have done that too. I would have done that too. Oh my gosh, I totally get it. I'm with her. And then there's a point, and I think it's important to talk about because I love how you approached it, where Betty goes past you. And it's and now we're not really in the car with her emotionally, but Amanda's performance almost challenges that because she's so captivating.
Yeah, Betty, one of the reasons Betty's so fascinating, there's so many reasons, because ever present for me is this sense of tragedy. And I don't even mean because she killed 2 people, although I don't not mean that clearly, but because there's so much, my therapist is always saying that one of the reasons that women have a hard time is because all we see is possibilities. And I have thought about that a lot. And now I dump on you guys, but that there's so many possibilities with Betty. There are so many ways that this didn't have to have worked out the way that it did. And clearly there are many outside influences determining that, and many unnecessary, purely to inflict pain type decisions that were made, but that, to sort of contemplate what could have been, not just that she wouldn't have ended up going to prison for double homicide, but that like she could have been the president of a college. She really like had so much promise and was so funny and charming and a person who just made friends everywhere. And and Amanda, I think it's because she comes from comedy. And she's so great at comedy. And all kinds of comedy, like, Brockmire alone is a thing that I'm kind of obsessed with. And she just plays this woman who, I just can't even, you should just watch it. But that I knew that she would bring so many qualities that she's brought to everything I've ever seen her do, which is no matter how unlikable she's being, the charisma is like it just sucks you in, and the humor and the humanity that all that brings. And so, you know, and every day it was like she never went off script, maybe because she's married to a, you know, showrunner writer, and she's a writer, and she respects what that takes, and she's not gonna, you know, think she knows better when you've thought about it for so long. But she would take a scene that, like, she did it exactly the way it was on the page, but the way she did it just like made it into something where, you know, it's obviously recognizable to me, but it just went to another level. Like, I'm thinking of, for people who have binged, the scene where she catches Dan on the phone in the hotel with Linda, and she goes, when he finds her again, she's gone and bought an $8,000 dress and is eating cake. I mean, she's eating cake in the scene. The whole thing was scripted, but the way, it's like she has a spoonful of cake that she's like gesturing with, and like she's talking with her mouth full, and, you know, the way she says the word ganache, like, I don't know. I'm like, I wrote that, but I, like, you know, she just, I don't know. I
want some films to write a thesis on Amanda Peet eating.
Oh my God.
Dirty John.
Well,
because people have written it about Brad Pitt, and I want it about our Amanda, because the losing her mind with food is pretty much my like favorite thing to watch. And by the way, it's also like a fun watch of Parker props, like, and the food story that is 80s.
Yeah.
Insider
info, most of the stuff she's eating is gluten-free bread, no matter what it seems to be in the scene. It's gluten-free bread.
So much gluten-free bread.
Yeah, that was a thing that she apparently like had a facility for eating and cramming in her cheek and not choking on when she's talking, and yeah. So
also abundant charisma, the Slater.
The Slater.
Who, by the way, on the Instagram, they talked so much about the Slater.
Well, because Sarah was in a play. Sarah Paulson was in when we met Amanda, she said, I said, have you ever worked with Christian? Which I didn't think she had, but you never know, you know, people have done a lot of theater that I'm not aware of. And what it turned out was that Sarah Paulson, her best friend, who you guys are going to watch with her on Instagram live later, had done a Tennessee Williams play with Christian on Broadway. And so Amanda had hung out with him a lot and really liked him. And so I just think that probably really helped them.
I think it did.
Good times and bad, because they really had each other in that sense. And there was no like fear that, you know, anything was going to get taken personally, or, you know, that someone wasn't going to be there, you know, emotionally or receptively as an actor, that someone was going to leave without playing their side of the scene, or, you know, anything like that.
It was also like underneath, I mean, they both have this raging charisma that you're drawn to them. And I think that was so important for what, you know, Christian brought to Dan, because you needed to know, you needed to be in her head, not our, like her head of why she was still in, and she was still in love with him, and that she saw this man that she fell in love with. And I think that the genuine fondness for each other like was also there.
Yeah,
it's so
well, and there was that one scene, remember, when she's pregnant, and it's part of a storyline where when they're younger and he's drunk, he does a thing which the real Dan Broderick did. I could not make something like this up. I'm not a good enough writer. That he would lie on his back and wave his arms and legs around like a turtle in its shell that can't get up. And it was called the turtle. And then he would roll himself back over and start growling and like crawling on his hands and knees, and that was called the alligator. And, you know, when people do things when they're drunk, they think they're very funny. And so then when she, later on, Betty herself said that one time she was very heavily pregnant, and being pregnant was hard for her, and she was folding laundry, and he came in and he pushed her over on her back. And she said, ha, very funny, help me get up. And he just stood there pointing at her and laughing and saying, you're the turtle, just repeatedly, and like would not help her get up, which I'm sure that's colored a little bit by subsequent actions and hatreds. I'm not really sure. I think he stood there pointing at his pregnant wife and laughing. But that's the way I scripted it, was that it was a little more like, haha, look at you, you look ridiculous. And Christian and Amanda, because of the way they were feeling, Betty and Dan were feeling about each other at the time, they made it into a much more loving scene. I was like, what? Do what I said? But I don't do that. But I was like, what do you mean? They're not, that's a horrible thing to do to a pregnant woman. I would have barfed. Like, what? And then I watched it and I was like, that's lovely.
It's her laughing at him. It's so damn cute.
And it was appropriate for where they were in their journey, that they were like, we're going to spend so much time trying to hurt each other. Let's have this scene be sweeter. And I was like, hey, when you're right, you're right.
I mean, it's funny. I know we keep talking about it, but when people watch the Instagram, they will see like who Amanda is. And I think people get that when they see her in interviews. And I think it's so incredible to think about how far from Betty Amanda is, how far from Dan Christian is. And then look, it's women in film. We can talk about the real of this. You know, we didn't have an incredibly long shoot. We didn't have abundant money, and yet we had ambition. And we together, I think, fought against a lot being cut. And, you know, we wanted it all. We wanted to tell this story the way it deserved to be told. And so when you think about what all of the actors and crew, but, you know, in total had to do to get everything on the screen every single day, and how, you know, Amanda went through the works into, I still have to, how many costumes was the final number?
I don't even know. I have it somewhere. It's insane. Like, it's a thing where I just went into instant denial. I was like, I didn't do that to people. Like, that's not a thing.
She would be in different time periods, different hair, makeup, wig, different wardrobe. I mean, and Amanda and Christian were the kind of actors who were like, we can do it. Just bring, you know, I'll get changed on set, or I'll do this. Like, they were all about also getting home to their families. And there was like efficiency to it. But when you actually see what they were going in and out of and who they are as humans, I don't know. Those are like the kind of weird things that no one will ever see, and they shouldn't see. It has to transcend that. But it makes me so proud of their performances on top of everything.
Yeah. Well, and you pointed out, which is very valid, this is women in film. So it's women, and it's, you know, women working in the industry, that if you can, it's always good. And believe me, I understand that a lot of times, you know, number one on the call sheet, or, you know, the showrunner you're going to work for, or the director or whatever, you either can't get this information, or no one's going to be honest about it up front, and then you're in it. But it is very good to try to work with people who actually do want to spend time with their families, because that that makes people more dedicated to a schedule that's going to work and be humane. Because there are people who will pay lip service to that, and then you're like, why are we always here? Why are we always ordering dinner? We're not getting anything done. We didn't need to shoot that again. You don't want to go home. That's what it is. But I do. So like, and because I am who I am and Jess is who she is, we can flex sometimes, but most people can't. So it is good to try to find out if people that you're prospectively going to work for, if there's any information you can get about what their lives are like and whether they like them, because that's just going to make your life a lot easier, at least to even be armed with that information and understand that that's why certain decisions are being made and certain reactions are being had, because those people want an excuse to call home and be like, I don't know, we're going to be here for a while, which, you know, if it's true, it's true. If it's because, you know, you want to hang out, or you want to cause trouble because that's your process, it's good to know these things. And like Jess says, the people that we worked with, everybody this season they wanted to do the best job they could, and they also wanted to have their families remember their names, which is good, because that's how I feel. But and also the other thing I was going to say was, because it's women in film, that the thing that made me the saddest to have to cut this season, can you guess what it is, Jess? I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm not you're in silence, but it was a thing.
Cut from shooting or cut from editorial?
We shot it and then we had to lose it, and it was one of those things.
Episode 2.
Huh?
Was it episode 2?
It was episode. No, because we had to come in and shoot it, so it wasn't 2 or 3. It was 4 or 5. 5. Sorry to bore everybody with this.
How would anything be cut? 5 is our magic episode. What was it? What is it? You haven't told me.
It was one of these things where like we were so over time, And this was so important to me. And I flew in someone from another state to do this story. Yeah, okay. So it was, for people who are binging, they'll either know this or not. It's not gonna ruin anything because it's not in the show. That at one point, Betty goes to court-ordered mediation. She expects Dan to be there. He's not there. The lawyer says to her, are you bringing do you have representation? The mediative lawyer who's running the session. And she says, no, I don't have anybody, but I'm talking to, we gave this lawyer a name, Ruth Sasloff, right? That's not the real lawyer's name. This person was a very famous feminist lawyer in San Diego County, a feminist family lawyer. And so when the mediation lawyer heard this, he called Dan Broderick, which is very inappropriate, and said, just so you know, Betty's refusing to pay for mediation because she doesn't want a divorce. So she's not gonna pay for it. And she also said that she's gonna hire Ruth Sasloff. So maybe you should just, take that into account and pay for stuff, implying that this woman is gonna take you to the cleaners if Betty hires this feminist lawyer. And Dan was like, yeah, I'm not worried about that, so not paying for anything, right? And so what ended up happening was, in real life, Betty went to see this lawyer who would have crushed Dan into dust, essentially. And she did not like her because this woman had gone to Berkeley and, Berkeley Law School and was sort of unkempt and like kind of bohemian probably. And, and so Betty was basically like, I don't, the thing she says about Gloria Steinem in the show is a quote from the real Betty, which is, Gloria Steinem's so pretty, but she's so weird. What is she trying to do? Right. And Betty basically said that she thought that Berkeley in the 60s and 70s was like Moscow and that no one wore bras and it was just disgusting on every level. And so when she walked in and met this woman with whom her entire life would have been different, she could not hire her because she was just skeeved out by her whole, sweaty, hairy thing, I guess. I don't know. And that Dan knew her so well that he was confident in advance to say, I'm not worried about that. It's not going to happen. And it didn't. And the person that we cast to play Ruth Sasloff, because I had just recently, like a few weeks or whatever before that, had seen that they were, people were trolling online because Top Gun Maverick brought everybody back except Kelly McGillis.
So
and
we
the narrative online
put her on a plane.
Because she, look at her, essentially. And I was like, oh my God. So then Kelly McGillis lives in North Carolina, and we called Kelly McGillis and we said, can you please come out here and play this part? And she came out and she was so awesome. And I love that scene so much. And then we got into editing and it was, all hands on deck crisis mode. And we realized that we could lift those scenes out without anybody ever having known they were there. And that's the worst feeling in the world, to be like, I can't not do this. And so, I don't know. We don't live in a world of DVD extras anymore, but if we did, that would be number one for me, is Kelly McGillis as the badass feminist divorce lawyer who could have changed Betty's life in her Birkenstocks and her, Robert jokes. Sigh. Anyway.
Oh. Which is like, by the way, I mean, talk about relevant themes. I always kind of laugh. I don't. I mean, saying this to a playwright is pretty much sacrilege. I'm going to lose all my writer cred. But I often think when like networks or studios ask you to talk about themes, what they're actually asking is, what's it about? Like, what are people going to be talking about, right? Like, here's the plot. Here's
the pitch because they think it makes them look smart. And you're just like, dude, I do this for a living. You think I don't know what the theme is? Get out of my face. Sorry.
And like, but like literally, it's like that's not what it is. So I kind of laugh because we now kind of use it as a term that I don't think it actually makes any sense. But I do think I love the conversation that Betty has allowed for us to have around not only women, but women supporting, like kind of how women perceive each other. And I think that like why Betty didn't hire Ruth, why Dan knew she would not hire Ruth is about what women are expected to be. For me, this was always such an opportunity to explore how aggressively like men frankly have weaponized the word crazy, that like your deepest fear in life as a woman, or they're deeper fears, but you know, it's pretty high up there, is to be called crazy. And to be able to explore that in this moment, I think never more relevant, because these are such antiquated ideas.
Yeah. No, I feel like a couple of people have asked me recently, you know, because we're talking about this, we're talking about the finale, and a couple of people have asked me, which is, it's such an interesting question, like, which is better, Old School or Animal House? And it's like, you can't answer this because one wouldn't exist without the other, and it's Animal House. But like, still, it's, you know, I've had arguments with people along these lines about things like that, where I'm like, I don't know, I love the one, but it would never, no one would have thought of it without the other one. So it's chicken or egg. That people have said to me, do you think if Betty was on trial now, she would be acquitted? And I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I think because it's, you know, to be in either jury room on either trial, which, you know, if, in case people don't know, Betty was on trial twice. And it was a very difficult job for everyone involved both times. And but yes, I think people would see that story differently, because they, for one thing, wouldn't need to be told by an expert witness what the concept of gaslighting even is, because at the time it was like, you know, he had to really get granular with it's from a movie starring Ingrid Bergman, you've heard of her, you know, this is what happened. And so people are very aware now of both you know, the crisis in mental health that we're having in this country, and also the concept that domestic abuse is more than bruises. That it can involve financial control and psychological intimidation, and the control of access to children or friends, or, you know, the isolation, just so many different aspects to it that people are familiar with and have experienced and can be honest with themselves, have identified, and are willing to tell people about, to be confessional. But at the same time, if Betty was on trial now, that means Betty would have been born in 1970. And, you know, as somebody who's not that far off from that, I don't know that I could be convinced that my entire life is about being someone's wife and mother. It would be more of a choice. I'm not condemning that. This is not a pejorative. It's more, I wouldn't have been raised to believe that was my function, and you know, to serve someone in that way, exclusively serve them and not myself. You know, the concept of partnership being solely you do the work part and I do the home part is, again, not judging it, but I think we know there are options now. Maybe they're not options for a given person, but we're aware that they exist, versus, you know, if my father came in the room and said, boys are calling here, you're a slut, you know, that conversation would have gone differently.
Yeah.
And, you know, Betty took all these things on herself. And then to every standard she had been told to meet, she met and surpassed. And her reward was to have it all ripped away from her in an incredibly painful and punitive and unnecessary, dishonest way. And I don't know the effect that would have on someone whose, you know, house of cards was that fragile to begin with. So it's an impossible question to answer. Like, yeah, I think maybe it would have been involuntary manslaughter now. And I also think she might not have done it at all. So I don't know.
It is such like we got very lucky, because I do think, I mean, going back to episode 2 the way we did, I think is a very, you know, there were some people who thought it was a you wanted to go forward, right? So like going back, but it's so integral to understand what's in her brain, what's clouding her. You know, we're learning right now, we're trying to educate ourselves on our own perceptions and, you know, our blind spots. And I think that what you were able to do in episode 2 was educate the audience on Betty's, you know, and I think it's, while it was incredibly serious, it also was, some of my funnest moments was when we were talking music, or when we were talking music on this show, and you would be like, Betty's not listening. to 80s music. Betty's listening to 60s music. Like the soundtrack in Betty's head. You were so
one right now.
yeah, but it was amazing. As much fun as we have with music on the show and getting to go to, you know, to the 80s. I loved how strong you were in your vision because you knew what was in Betty's head.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of showrunners who don't, you know, they want to come in and they want to feed off the energy of the room completely after maybe they've written the pilot, it's gone to series, and then it's you know, it's going to be a group of minds, you know, the whole will be brought to bear on this, but which I also like. I love what the writers room does after you've sort of launched, but I also feel like I have to know I have to know what I think going into that, and that doesn't mean that I can't be talked out of what I think, but I have to have a certain baseline of it's this, not that, in order to direct the conversation on any show that, you know, I have a certain power in the writer's room on, whether I'm running it or not. It's my job to you can't go down every road. And like every choice you make closes off other choices. And so the reverse of that is if you don't make any choices, then you make no decisions, right? So then that's how shows get shut down. So yeah, I mean, I had a lot of opinions on this story also just because I've spent longer with it, I think, than any story I've ever told, just because I found it before I even wanted to be a writer and was reading it for pleasure before I wanted to be a writer. And yeah, so I definitely was like, in certain instances would say things like that, you know, and the same thing was true first season, that I would be like, we switched to the point of view of the original Dirty John Meehan. I knew I didn't want to do it until late in the series because the show wasn't about him. It was about his victims. And I use that word loosely. It was about the people that he affected and that he chose and why. And so I didn't want to be in his point of view. And there were a lot of stories pitched where people would be like, and then John this, and then blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, that is a great story. And we can't do it because point of view. Like, we don't ever stay in the room with him after people leave. Like, that was another like editing thing. I was on the editors too about point of view. So yeah, you have to know a lot of things about the characters of any show as the person who's going to deign to tell people how to pitch stories on the show. Like, for people to have a chance of success, you have to know what success is going to look like for you to a certain extent. That was a lot of talking. Hi.
It was so good though. And I definitely want to come back to a discussion about the writer's room and, you know, the kind of the way that you run your writer's room. But if you don't mind, the conversation is going so well, but I did want to pop in with some of the questions that we've been getting here in Zoom and on Facebook. Thank you to everyone who's been submitting these questions. So a kind of standard question for these kind of conversation is, you know, what drew you to the project, right? But I want to narrow that and ask you, what draws you to this genre specifically? As someone who is, you know, a massive crime TV fan, whether it's true crime, you know, docuseries, or whether it's scripted, you know, like this is what I watch nonstop. One of the things that draws me to the genre over and over again is, like romance, for instance, it's one of the few genres that takes women seriously throughout the story. So they're not just an adjunct, they're not a secondary character, but it takes them seriously and it takes their fears seriously and their desires seriously. And I think that's why, you know, true crime or, you know, scripted is so incredibly popular with women. But what drew you to the genre? Because you've worked in it before.
Yeah, I mean, you know, for any writer, whether it's drama or comedy, what you're looking for in stories is conflict and tension, right? Even if it's handled with humor, that's what you need for a story to be propulsive. Like, everyone that has to want things, those wants have to be across purposes, even in a comedy. But, you know, in drama, the extra thing that the true crime genre gives, I think, is the ultimate tension and conflict is from people in under extreme stress in extreme circumstances is what's going to really show, you know, not only extreme behavior, but also sort of like the natural state of the psyche in reaction, and you know, to put people in situations that are life and death. You're going to see aspects of them that maybe they didn't even know about themselves. And so, you know, I mean, last year, one of the things that was great as a true crime fan was that's never how that story goes. For people who aren't familiar with last season, the bad guy died. The bad guy was killed by someone that he was intending to kill, because I fully believe that. I think he was intending to kill both, that John Meehan was going to kill both Tara and Deborah Newell. And Tara Newell killed him instead. And that is not to take anything away from the trauma that they are still suffering from, the, you know, lasting memories and the effect that it's had on their ability to trust, and all the terrible things about that story that they have, you know, they're working through, and they're doing such a great job, you know, telling people their stories so people can learn. But that, you know, the bad guy lost in that story in a, you know, super heightened way. And that was great, both to your point of, you know, stories that take women's desires and just their existence seriously. Unfortunately, sometimes it's taking it seriously because someone else is taking their existence as a thing that, you know, belongs to them, that they can do whatever they want with, which is, you know, a thing to examine as well in that genre. But it really does come down to showing extremes of character and how interesting that is as a writer, and also that it's showing extreme decisions being made that I can't identify with. And as a writer, I need to excavate that and figure out, why do I think that happened? Which I think you learn so much about the human condition and yourself by trying to put yourself in those positions. That alone makes it worth it. You know, there's the fear of being a ghoul also, that I deal with, but I do think we learn from stories, and I think the most extreme stories are the ones you learn the most from. And I do think there are people who would like me to not write true crime stories, and like you not to enjoy them. And I totally respect that. I couldn't respect it more, but it's just how I feel, that this is how I learn.
So let's go back to this conversation that you were having about the writer's room, and, you know, how you come into it with, you know, not perhaps, you know, a singular vision, but a very, you know, distinct vision and story that you want to tell. And I, you know, assume then also a way that you want it to be told. So can you talk a little bit about how you put your writer's room together, and, you know, like what you're looking for in a writer that you bring in, you know, either to a project like this one or your other projects?
I mean, it's interesting because I've been doing a lot of Zooms with aspiring writers lately, as you know, Jess has been doing the same thing, and because we can now. I would ordinarily be in the car driving somewhere, and I can do this. But this show, for instance, like we're at an interesting time in the business because, or for me, because I started on 24 episode season broadcast network shows, which are dinosaurs, and they're going away. Now there's, you know, 13 is probably the norm. That used to be a mid-season pickup. 13 is the norm. Then there's 10, which I did on Bates Motel and my last show, Chance. Now I'm doing 8 on this. That does something which I think that, you know, professionals and aspiring professionals are going to have to take into account when it comes to television, which is it actually is making skill in the room, which we can talk about, and skill on the page, two completely different skill sets, and one isn't as necessary sometimes. Because, like, I'll just give you this season as an example. Last season we had the podcast, it had 6 episodes. We needed to turn it into 8. We needed to mess around with form a little bit because the podcast would end with these great out of nowhere cliffhangers. Like, then people told her to get a gun, but she wasn't going to get one because her sister had been killed with a gun. And you're like, wait, what? What sister? What gun? Oh my God, I can't wait till next Tuesday, right? I can't do that. I can't have suddenly someone go to Connie Britton, you should get a gun because your sister. Like, I can't, it just doesn't make any sense in a scripted storytelling format. So we had to, like, you know, pull it apart, twist it back together, make it a little longer, that kind of thing. this season, and we had Christopher Goffard, who had done the podcast, and he had never been in a writer's room before. He really wanted to be in a writer's room. He had no idea how it worked. So I did sort of, to a certain extent, construct the writer's room around making him comfortable, because a lot of the stuff that we were using had not been used in the podcast. He had hundreds and if not thousands of pages of transcripts and interviews and, affidavits that Deborah swore to, and, court things for John and blah. But I wanted him to feel it's a very different environment to be a star feature reporter at the LA Times than to come in and be my employee, right? So, I hired a couple more journalists who now write for television, so they could kind of, bring them along and say, this is how it's the same, this is how it's different. Because there was going to be a lot of legal stuff, I like to have, people who I have a one go-to who has a great legal background. So that a little bit of that, but people who are going to be really great in the room, focusing on building the structure, what goes in what episode, to Jess's earlier point about themes, because I always find themes very helpful, because when you're writing a given episode, if the theme is isolation or abandonment, and whenever you start to wander off point, it's like, wait, what is this episode about? It's about how each of them think they're alone. You know what I mean? So all that kind of stuff is a group effort, and it's, people bouncing off each other. It has to be a room where someone asked me an interesting question recently. They said, should I take an improv class to prepare for being in a writer's room? And I'd never been asked that before. It was so interesting to think about. I did work on Desperate Housewives, which was all sitcom writers and former stand-up comedians. So I kind of was like, I don't know. And then I thought, the only reason you should take an improv class to prepare yourself for the writer's room is if you're really honest with yourself and you know that what you actually are is a person who waits to talk. That you don't listen, you wait to talk. Right. Improv makes you have to be in the moment, because you have to, at any moment, someone's going to turn to you and go, what about the pickles? And you go, and then you have to go, the pickles, that's right, I made them last night, blah, 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 So if you're a person who, for instance, we're talking about something and you think of a pitch, and then you're just like, my pitch, I got to wait till they stop talking for my pitch. Then the conversation may totally go off topic, and then you suddenly, there's an opening and you blurt whatever, and I go, yeah, we talked about that. Did you not hear how we discussed that doesn't work? Like, not that I would be mean to you about it, but I would just sort of be like, yeah, I think we're past that. But you also didn't hear anything else that we said, because you were holding on so tight, which I get. I get that it's tense, especially for lower level people who, it's a lot of personalities and that you're trying to navigate. But one of my jobs as the air traffic controller of my show is to remember that you were trying to say something. And so once the conversation is like everybody's feeding off each other, somebody goes on a tangent, I bring us back and I say, Ebony, were you trying to say something before? And if you were listening, you can either say, yeah, I actually still want to make that point because no one made it. Or people tried to argue away from it, I still think it's true. Or we talked about it and I actually don't think it's valid anymore. Fine. So then we keep going. So that would be the only reason to take improv, if you secretly know that you really don't listen. Because if you don't listen,
there's a lot of people who should take improv.
I mean, that's another thing.
No, now that you're saying this, I'm like, with this information about.
Yeah, I think this is absolutely fascinating, because this is not the kind of advice that you typically get, from people trying to coach you into a writer's room. Right. When they talk about expanding your skills, it's very rare for someone to say, what kind of a listener are you? Are you active enough as a listener? Because, you're not some hermit producing something. And if you are, in fact, just waiting to speak, you're going to miss the tenor of the conversation. You're never going to be, fully involved. Like, I think that's and so helpful. So I know I have some writers here watching. What kind of a listener?
Right. So then I went on a tangent of that, but because I just wanted to make sure that I said it, because I had never been asked it before, and I just thought it was really fascinating. But so we start the writer's room. Both these seasons, I have not written the first episode yet. when we start the writer's room. So a lot of times you're going to get a job, you're going to have the first script that you can just read and read and read and internalize the tone of it and start to think how you would write that way, or if you could, or what, you know, what you could work on. Or maybe it's like, oh, I totally know how to do that. There's no script like that starting these seasons. I haven't done it yet. So like what I have done the last 2 seasons is I gather the writer's room and then I'm like, let's arc out the whole season roughly. And then Jess always has to go with me for these things. We'll go to the studio and then the studio and the network and pitch the entire season up front, because it's kind of my Carmela Soprano goes to the psychiatrist philosophy, which is she goes in and she goes, oh my God, he's so terrible. And I take the money and I feel so conflicted, but I don't want to leave because the kids are blah. And then he goes, okay, you're a terrible person. You just like the money. If you were going to leave, you would have left. If you really want to leave, then leave, or don't leave. I don't care. I'm not your dad, but now you can't say that you haven't been told. So basically that's kind of my my philosophy about that is like, I'm going to pitch the whole thing. Then you have to pretend you were listening. So then you read episode 5 and you go, oh my God, he's dead. And I go, yeah, you knew that. Like you did. So the writers have to help me with that, which is very labor intensive, even though first season we had the podcast and all the background material. This year, Betty, you know, there's a lot of Betty on the Google. There's a lot of books. There's a lot of, you know, articles in the LA Times. There's a lot of stuff you could read, but then it's about culling all the parts of it that you're actually going to use, which is, you know, that's its own job, you know, the embarrassment of riches of the material. And so the period that writers are working with me is usually, for the most part, unless it's been specifically negotiated, now up before production starts. Which means maybe, I think when we went into actual shooting this year, we had like 3 or 4 scripts. That's half the season. I don't know, maybe Jess can remember better. It's all blur. So a lot of the end scripts, people they're not going to be as involved with the writing of, because they probably had to go get another job, frankly, because you can't pay your bills on an 8-episode season, no matter how hard I lobby for you with business affairs. You can't pay your bills. You got to go do interviews and go on another job. And maybe you can still be writing with me, or maybe you can't afford to do that, which is fine because I'm supposed to be able to, you know, shoulder it. But that makes the on the page, I say less important, but I don't mean to be flippant about it. It's more like your experience with me on a show like this. The odds are it's going to be solely room based. You'll probably go away, and I have adopted this from Shonda Rhimes's camp, because I know I have a lot of friends who work for Shonda Rhimes a lot, and they this makes total sense to me as a person who used to run marathons. They do each draft together, each first draft together. Maybe this has been talked about in Women in Film, and they call it a Franken draft. And so it comes in and it's horrible. It has 8 legs and it's 90 pages long, and, you know, it's groaning in pain, put me out of my misery. But you have a draft, which for somebody like me who rewriting is easier than writing, it's the muscle memory of, oh my God, I have a draft, even though it's a monster. I have a draft, I have something to work with. And it actually gives writers in the room more opportunities to try different things. Cause, you know, we always ask, are there any scenes that people really want to try their hands at? I have heard, which maybe some people on this seminar want to speak to, people sometimes regard that as taking advantage of writers, that we're all doing drafts that our names aren't on. I try to compensate for that by making sure everybody gets script credits, because I understand this is a new world that we're in. And again, some people had to leave, whatever. So that part is always protected by me. I'm not trying to get people to do unpaid work. People will be paid. They just might not be paid on the script that we're Franken drafting. But that, I think, is a valuable experience that I do try to have, because so many people have to leave before they get to the nitty gritty of the scripts and production, which we could talk about forever. But so the room, the dynamic of the room, and making sure that you're a value add to the room, in the sense that, like, you know, there should be discussion and even argument, but it should be respectful and free and safe. And I should be the person who is making sure that people are being heard. and all that. And if somebody really shows me in that environment, because I read you when I hired you, I know you can write. And one of the funny things about this business is I work so hard and Jess works so hard to identify original voices. Then we put them on staffs and their job is to imitate me. That I'm not going to learn that much about how well you can imitate me. I'm going to learn that you can help me in that respect. I don't need you to help me in that specific respect. I just need you to help me. So whatever it is that I need help with, if you help me, then I am going to help you. Is how that the relationship, I can only say how I do it, but that is what's involved with these shorter orders, is that the importance of room dynamics has become so paramount in a way that I think is just going to continue, because we're not going back to 24 episodes. People are going to cycle through various rooms and be maybe writing a script while they're in another room. The room itself has really become vital. Just, I can't think of another word. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, that was a really ramble.
No, that was fantastic. I want to bring you back and have an inside the writer's room with you. I think it would be so just incredibly helpful for our writing. So we have only time for one quick question, and unfortunately, it's going to mean Jessica, you trying to give us bullet points, but I did have a couple people ask specifically about you and about how you got your start in producing and what kind of background you think is necessary to be, you know, the excellent producer that you are. So again, I'm sorry I'm not giving you a lot of time.
No problem. And I would just say, Alex and I are headed after this to, I've dragged her to the Twitter, where we're going to answer some questions on Ask Dirty John. So if there's anyone whose questions we didn't get to that can steer and maybe hashtag WIF, you know, we'll try to keep our eye out and try to answer there too.
Absolutely.
I would say no one taught me how to produce, which is only by virtue of the fact that I started producing when I was 22. But I had a lot of mentors that maybe didn't know they were my mentor, that I was looking for, and I was looking at who was doing it in a way I wanted to and who I didn't want to do it that way. And but I think at the end of the day, the way that I produce literally just came from loving writers. And the first writer I loved was my brother. And so I started producing for him he was directing his short. We were babies. And all I cared about was him getting his show his short the way he wanted it. I believed in him. I believed in his vision, and I loved him. And that's kind of just how I did every single thing, whether it's picking up bagels or, giving him notes. It didn't matter. And I try to keep that philosophy. So I do think other people can do that, even if they enter at different places. My philosophy is only work with writers that you think are extremely talented. And then hole up, grab their arm, stand beside them, sometimes in front of them, if that's the place to protect them, sometimes behind them if they need help up the hill. And that's just, I guess, kind of my approach.
Yeah, it is.
I love it. It's now 6 o'clock. So yes, everyone there's like 20 people who asked questions.
Yeah, literally, we're going
Kelly, to Heather, Siobhan, Mina, head over to Twitter.
Yes, I'm looking at these questions, and I would definitely engage with these questions if you're still interested.
Okay, we're gonna do this. So what can we do, Ebony? Can we do Ask Dirty John and then add hashtag WIF so we can see them?
Yeah, that would be great. So if you want to do a hashtag WIFLA.
I'm looking so that I can hashtag WIFLA, and we'll look for those as well as the Dirty Johns.
Y'all are wonderful. Thank you so much for this.
Actually, do hashtag Ask Dirty John if you can.
One window, and I'm going to have Instagram Live open in another one, and then on my TV is going to be the finale. I'm just going to swivel head.
If you think you and your best friend are nuts, you can really feel better about yourselves, because those two ladies are lunatics.
I can't wait. This, however, was absolutely, this has been fantastic. This has been one of my favorite conversations. Thank you both so much for joining us for this conversation. You put together just an amazing show. The writing, the production, the design on it. I absolutely love this show. So thank you so much for the work that you've done and for joining us here to talk about it. Thank you to everyone who joined us for the conversation. Head over to Twitter. If you didn't get your question answered here, you might get it answered over there. These women are here to give you the info, the background that you need Hopefully I'll see you on Thursday for our next Laptop Cinema Club. But until then, have a great evening. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, thanks.